Hey everybody, this is my 20-gallon open-topped office tank, and yesterday I shot a video where I discussed the possibility of adding more substrate and possibly even adding some sand into the substrate to create a denser zone near the bottom. And what I'm hoping to do is create enough of an environment that will allow for some denitrification. And I got a lot of good responses and a lot of good comments. I've been thinking about it. And I think I'm going to do it, but I don't. This is where it starts to get a little questionable for me. To do it right, I would really need to do a deep bed. I'd need probably solid 4 inches and have, maybe 3 of that at least sand. If I was going to do just the gravel substrate, I would probably want to do maybe a 5 or 6 inch deep bed, but I'm not doing that. I'm not talking about going to those extremes. I'm talking about simply adding some substrate. I do have more of this gravel downstairs. I'm going to get that out, and we're going to get that cleaned up, rinsed off. I'm probably even going to boil it just for the sake of who knows how long it's been sitting down in the basement and what kind of mold or fungus or whatever might have attached to it. Whatever. It's just been sitting in an old bucket, so it's going to get sterilized before it goes in the tank. I also bought some play sand, and we're going to have a look at that. I learned my lesson long ago that play sand definitely needs to be thoroughly rinsed and washed off before it goes in a tank. I've dumped it in before and then spent days and days and days trying to get the cloudiness out of the tank from all the fine particulate that gets swirled around in the water from the play sand. So we're going to rinse that off. We're going to rinse the gravel off, and then we are going to start trying to incorporate it into the tank. I'm not going to remove anything. I may have to temporarily lift up a few of these rocks and set them back down. The plants will just be buried a little bit deeper. Again, I'm not going crazy with this. I'm going to add maybe an inch of gravel, which will give us maybe a 2-inch depth of gravel. And then I'm going to put enough sand in it that the sand can settle down and sort of fill in all the gaps, but not be so much sand that it looks like there's a sandy bottom. It's still going to be a gravelly bottom, but it's going to have a little bit of sand visible in the gravelly bottom. If you dig down deeper into it, however, you'll find more and more sand as you get deeper. And I think what we'll end up with will be a environment where the water is able to flow sort of through the surface of the substrate fairly freely, which allows for good nitrification. It breaks down the ammonia and the nitrites with that nice oxygenated water that flows quickly. But for denitrification, you need a very, very slow flow. You don't even need flow. You almost need it to be pulled through the water like almost like a capillary action or a wick effect as you want to move through the sand. So if I can get enough sand in there that it packs down and we actually prevent the water from flowing through it, then I might be able over time to develop enough of the denitrifying anaerobic bacteria that does not thrive in oxygen-rich water. That actually breaks down the nitrates and breaks it down into nitrogen gas. And if I can get a little bit of that going on, I don't even need all of it going on, but if I can get a little bit of that going on, I think it will give me a helping hand at just keeping this tank a little bit cleaner and a little bit more well-maintained. So let me get started on that. We'll go out in the yard. We'll have a look at the gravel. We'll have a look at the sand, whatever that's worth. But we're going to do a whole video here of me getting this all put together today. And hopefully by this evening, we'll be in there putting some gravel in. I'll show you how I gently try to add the gravel as best I can. And we're just going to play it by ear and see how this works out. So sit tight, and I will see you out in the yard. All right, everybody. Here we are out in the yard. And it's just a gorgeous day, so I thought I'd take a second to have a quick look around. Got some lilies blooming over there. Maybe we'll do a yard tour later on. But for now, this is the sand we're going to be using. No special reason I bought this other than my little local Ace Hardware or whatever it's called. True Value, I think, actually, down in town here 5 minutes away had this. And so I bought it rather than having to drive 20 minutes away to get to the Home Depot or the Lowe's to get what basically would have been whatever kind of sand they carry. Again, I wasn't looking for anything specific when it came to sand. I just wanted basic silica sand. And in this case, I'm actually kind of glad I got this. It was $6.17 after taxes. It's 50 pounds of sand, so it's going to be way, way more than I'll ever need in that one tank alone. But it's really, really fine sand, and it even says that it's good for molding. And if you've ever done a sand mold, then you know you need pretty fine sand to pack it in there and get a nice clean mold. So this is going to be some really, really fine sand, and it'll be good for what I want it to do. I want it to sift down and filter down between all of the little pieces of substrate and gravel and make basically a base at the bottom. And so we're going to hope that this works out. So next we're going to put it in some water, and we'll get started on that right now. Alright, so what we're going to do is small batches at a time. I'm just going to use this glass here, and I'm going to scoop some sand in there. Again, this is really, really fine stuff. You can see the way it packs together in the glass. And instant cloudy. And as fine as this stuff is, that cloudy is probably going to take an awful long time to go away. So I'm going to fill this not halfway up with sand. It looks like the sand's settling here, although where the actual surface of the sand is kind of difficult to tell. It just gets thinner and thinner as it goes up. But right around here is where it looks like the sand is settled out. So I'm going to fill it up until we've got water coming out of the top, and then that'll be my first batch. We'll swirl that around. We'll pour some of this water off, and then we'll see how much we get from the second swirl. In fact, let's just call that good right there. So I'm just swirling the sand around, really mixing it up so that any cloudiness can have the opportunity to get out of it. So let's pour this off. And that's how much sand we've got left behind. So let's fill that back up with water and see how cloudy it gets again. It seems like it's having a pretty big impact. I think we might only have to do this maybe one more time, 2 more times, and then it should get clear enough. So let's see what this looks like. Well, that definitely made a huge difference. And I'm already going to say this is the last time I'm going to do this batch. So that gives you a pretty good idea of how much rinsing it takes to get this play sand, because that's what this really is. It can be used for molding, but it's sold as play sand, and it's really, really fine, which is exactly what I want, so I'm kind of happy about that. And you can already see how much clearer that is. So give that a second or so for the sand to fall out of it, and then that's how cloudy the water's gotten. So I'll do this one more time, and then we'll call it good. And I will probably have to do, I don't know, I'm going to say 3, 4, maybe 5 of these little batches. So I'll be out here for the next hour or so rinsing sand off. And if we get to do anything interesting with the gravel, I will get some video of that we'll put in. And hopefully in a few minutes we're going to see inside back at the tank, and we're going to start working on getting this stuff actually in the tank. So sit tight. I'll see you in a minute. Alright, and here we are sometime later. And that's all the sand I'm going to collect up, or rinse down, or whatever you want to call it. It's a lot of sand, actually. And I found that when I was rinsing it, there was very little, I'll call it dirt or debris that was in it. The last time I got sand, I got it from the Home Depot, and it was much coarser than this, and it had a lot more sort of dirty material. And I don't know, the cloudiness in the water had a darker, sort of muddier appearance, whereas the cloudiness we saw with this really boiled down to nothing more than really, really fine particles of sand. And I gave it enough of a rinse that I got the majority of the super, super fine, I'm talking like grains of pollen size sand out of there. And I did leave a fair amount of the really fine stuff in there, because I do want that dense packed in material. And if you think about grains of sand, if you zoom in with the microscope, you'll see there's little spaces in between where you can fit smaller grains of sand. And if you zoomed in tighter, you'd find little gaps where you could fit smaller grains of sand. And you could zoom in again. I learned that from Horton Hears a Who when I was a kid. You can always find a smaller little gap in there somewhere to fit smaller and smaller pieces of sand. And that's exactly what I want that to do, is have lots and lots of that really fine dust that over time will settle down into the bottom and won't be an issue as far as cloudiness. So the gravel, as you saw the bleach bottle sitting there, this is, I don't know, there's maybe half a cup of bleach in there, quarter cup of bleach. It doesn't take a lot, and that's actually way more than I would even need. I'm just overkilling it, so I don't have to question whether it was enough in there or not. So I'll let this soak. I've been swirling it around every 15 minutes or so just to make sure it's keeping the you know, anything that's in there in contact with fresh bleach as it swirls and circulates around the tank. And then I'll get this good and rinsed out thoroughly, and since it's a hard, non-porous surface, a good thorough rinsing until, you know, you don't really smell that bleach smell in the water anymore is more than adequate to get that cleaned up enough to be able to use in the tank. So the next step is going to be, after rinsing that of course, is going to be to start layering the sand in, and we're going to start that pretty soon. In a little while we're going to go into the office and we're going to start getting that sand in. We're going to do the sand first, let that settle down, and then we're going to do more gravel on top, and then we'll see if we're going to add any more sand on top of that. So sit tight and I'll see you at the tank. All right, now that's our sand. We're going to use all of that, but I think the easiest way to do this is going to be to take a scoop at a time and just pour it in there gently. I'm going to get all kinds of stuff swirling around. There's just nothing I'm going to be able to do about that. This tank's going to be messy for a while. But I think once I get enough of it piled in one area, we'll start with this corner just to let everybody see what I'm doing. I'm not going to do this whole entire process on video. This is going to take quite a while to finish this off. I'll probably even do it in stages. I'll come back in a little while and do a little more This this tank sits on a roll-top desk, and I can't actually get close to it to work on it, so I have to lean over at a weird odd angle even just to get to it, and it actually gets my back hurting after a while, so I can only do so much work on this tank at any one given time. Now here underneath of this cave where I'm pouring it is where my pleco lives in this tank. I got a clown pleco that lives right under this cave here. So let's see how well this stirs in. As I suspected, I can pretty much get most of this just to go down into the substrate. You're not even going to notice it. And then when I add more substrate in on top of it, we'll definitely be able to get quite a bit of sand in here. And as a lot of people have suggested, I can put more sand towards the back than up towards the front. Although over time, it's going to work its way through. And unless you put physical barriers in there that prevent the sand from migrating, it will eventually migrate. Even if I'm extremely gentle with the gravel vacuuming and, disturbing the tank, over time, just the fish in there kicking the gravel around when they move and rooting through it and stuff like that will eventually have that all making its way around the tank. So I can tell you one thing we're going to do before we get the tank up and running again is we're going to shorten the intake on the filter so that it's not really close to the bottom, and that will reduce the chances of us sucking up any sand. Now in this case, if the gravel, or if the sand does actually wind up causing a little bit of grit to get in the filter and shut it down, and that's always a possibility when you're using sand or any kind of really fine medium in your tank. But in this case, I do have that small power head that's flowing, so even if the filter were to shut down, I would still have the redundancy of the power head giving me circulation in the tank, and that would be more than enough to keep this tank good and healthy, especially until I wound up noticing that the filter wasn't running. That shouldn't take too long on a tank like this. I'm in the office all the time. The fish room, not so much. So sometimes filters down there have shut down, and it's taken me quite a while, a couple days sometimes, to notice that the filters weren't running. Whereas in this case, if the sand does cause the filter to shut down, I'll notice it pretty quickly. Worst case scenario would be like an overnight type situation. And as I said, with the redundancy of that power head, I'm not worried about it at all. So I think this will be an interesting project. It's going to be fun to find out whether I get to a point where I sort of find that stasis where the nitrates are being dealt with at the same rate they're being introduced, and I kind of wind up with this tank that just sort of sits somewhere around 20 or 30 parts per million and just always kind of hovers there. That's sort of what I'm anticipating, but I don't know if that's what's going to happen in the long run. And it's going to take probably 6 months for the tank to sort itself back out and for the denitrifying bacteria to start, developing the colonies and the sizes it would need to. That takes quite a while to get started. So, we're not looking at next weekend being able to have some kind of results to talk about. This is going to be a ongoing thing. So, as I always say, make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss any of the updates that come. But again, we can expect to see some, weird cloudy water and some changes happening to the tank and maybe some algal blooms, or who knows. But this is definitely going to shift the chemistry of the tank around quite a bit once we get it back up and running. So let me keep on with this. I will catch up with you again when we start putting the gravel in, and we'll see how that goes. And then we'll just go from there. So hang on a little bit, and I'll see you when we get to the gravel. All right, we went through about half the sand, maybe not quite half of it, but that was still a pretty significant amount of the sand. So now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it with the gravel. Now, if you notice, I left sand fully exposed on the surface. We're up above the gravel line, and that's because I'm going to be putting more gravel on top of that. So I wanted to put as much sand in there as I felt like I could get away with, because the sand is really going to be key to what I'm going for here. And over time, this will sift its way down in. I might even wind up adding some more sand to it. Not sure how this is going to play out fully by the time we're done. But this should be plenty of gravel. In fact, one of the things we can do right now is lift that up. These rocks are all down on the bottom, so I don't really know how much more I can lift them up. I don't want to ruin the cave here for my pleco. So we'll see if we can't do something else about that. I might actually put one more rock right here, and then I can take this and prop it up much higher. In fact, I could probably just do something like that. And I also had a bunch of river stones that were in this tank. I don't know if anybody had ever noticed them. So I did go through and I sifted all those out. Once we're done with the gravel, I'll go ahead and put those back in. Just a little bit of ornamentation, throwback to my early days. Bought several bags of those river stones, and I've been using them in various places ever since. In the back of the tank, I'm just going to kind of dump it. It'll sort itself out over time. I don't need to do a lot of spreading it around back there. Can't even see it. Just want to make sure it's not covering up any of the Java here. See, here's another one of those. Bunch of babies coming off of it. So don't forget, I sell my plants, so all these little Java window loaves I'm pulling out of here are going to be going downstairs into my grow out bucket. So check my email, and if you're interested, get in touch with me and I can get you lots of Java. I don't know if you can hear Squeaker in the other room, but he's making all kinds of noise out there, so I gotta go find out what he's doing. He probably just wants to go out. Alright, I'm going to say you've got the idea of how we're putting the gravel back in the tank, and that's almost done. Honestly, I'm just going to tweak it a little bit, add a little here and there, put those river stones back in, and then we will eventually get the tank back up and running. So let's see what happens. There's your before, we'll call it. Alright everybody, I wound up adding a little more sand and I've decided I am going to put another rock underneath of this one to prop it up some more. And I wanted to show you the rock I found. I looked around quite a bit for all the rocks I've got lying around the house. You think I would have been able to find one easily, but it took a little bit of doing to find this one. So don't know how good of a look you're getting of that, but it's got great texture, awesome colors. And I'm hoping that if I can set it this way, if you can see how it's got this sort of concave area, that might allow for more cave area on the inside. So I think that's going to be a good rock. So I'm still working on it. I wound up pulling all of the babies off of the Java. I know it's kind of cloudy, you can't really see it at the moment, but the Java looks like I've pretty much removed it from the tank. I have not. That's just removing the babies and getting it back down to the base plant. And I lifted the power head up about 2 inches to get it up off of the bottom. So that's where we are right now, and I'm going to keep on working on it. All right. So now that we're done, I've been waiting, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours, and we've still got a lot of cloudiness in the water. If you look at it really closely, you can actually see that it looks like standing outside on a foggy day, and you can actually see the little tiny individual particles drifting by in the current. So what I've done is put a filter pad in that is not officially a polishing pad. It doesn't really filter down to the micron level. I just shot a video about it. I'll attach a card so you can see some more detail about it. But it's just a piece of felt lining, or not felt, I keep calling it felt. It's fleece lining. And it's a really dense matte material that will filter out a lot more fine particles than my standard filters. Now, when you get into this kind of stuff, these particles make, individual grains of pollen. But, you could probably compare them to that. This is so fine. It's really fine particles of sand. So it's probably going to take a few days before all of the cloudiness starts wearing out of the water. Might even do a water change or two after the water has settled down a little bit. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But it will clear up and it will settle down. My clown pleco, I did see it out and about swimming around, kind of looking for a new home while I was in there moving everything around. So he looked a little bit stressed out, but otherwise looked okay. And I think we're going to probably wind up getting some kind of result here. I'm not entirely sure about that. I was thinking about it a little while ago. There is definitely a threshold to how deep the sand needs to be before it will work. You can't say that a 5-inch sand bed will give you the denitrification that I'm talking about, and so therefore a 2.5-inch deep sand bed will give you half of the denitrification. It doesn't work like that. If the sand bed I've created here, and it will settle down over time, we'll get that sand will get lower and lower, and we're, the black rim is all the way down here, and then the bottom of the tank is down here, so that's still, that's a pretty significant sand bed. We're looking at maybe 3 inches deep. So I don't know if that will be deep enough. What needs to happen is we need to get the water moving through that sand at a rate that is so slow that the word flow can't even really be applied to it. You almost have to think about it seeping through it or weeping through it in a wick effect type, can't think of the word I'm looking for here, capillary action, that's the word I'm looking for. And if we can get the water moving through there that slowly, then what happens is all the oxygen gets used up in it, and you get this anaerobic environment, and that environment will allow the denitrifying bacteria to grow. And the water very slowly moving through that substrate will have some of the nitrates broken down and taken out of it. So once you reach that threshold, you will begin to denitrify the water a little bit. And then after that, if you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you'll certainly be doing more and more. So in my case, the question is just going to be, did I put enough in there to actually achieve that effect? Am I going to get this sort of null water movement down through the sand all the way at the bottom of the tank that will actually provide me with some denitrification. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to find out. I've never studied any of this kind of stuff. I've read about it enough to get an idea of how it all works. I know a lot of people have recommended I watch some of Father Fish's videos. I am familiar with his videos and his tanks. I've never really spent a lot of time watching the videos, though. I really don't spend a lot of time watching other people's fish videos, believe it or not. And this one's probably really going to blow your mind if you're still watching this video all the end of this time. I've never even read what the Wallstad method is. I'm familiar with it. I understand the basic concept behind it as far as having, the most naturally functioning tank as possible. But I've never actually read what the method is and how you go about setting up the tank and establishing it. It's just never been something I've wanted to do. And if I'm not wanting to do it, then it's just a matter of curiosity. And I've honestly never really bothered to read all about it. So make no mistake, I'm not trying to, recapitulate anybody else's setup, or I'm not trying to go with any method here or anything fancy or sophisticated. I'm literally just trying to put a deeper sand bed in the tank and then maybe a little more gravel just to give some depth to the tank's substrate, and then maybe I will get a little bit of denitrification from that. So again, this is not any kind of real serious experiment. It's more of just a curiosity to see if I can do something simple like this and make an impact. If I do, maybe I'll start going around to all my tanks and making the substrate deeper. I know there's a lot of people out there that swear by the deep substrate, Father Fish, of course, being one of them. And so maybe they're onto something that I will, eventually develop into my, style and method of keeping tanks. I don't know. But this is going to be my first little foray into finding out. So make sure you're subscribed, as I've already said, I believe. And you will not miss any of the updates on this tank. Again, it's going to be a while. It's going to be months before we find out what's really going on in here. This tank is probably going to go through some weird changes, and I might see some, bacterial blooms or some algal blooms, or who really knows what might be happening. Even just the reflectivity of the sand, that bright white sand reflecting light back up onto the plants might actually provide a shock to the plants. Who knows? In my experience, anytime you do anything to a tank, even when it's just getting in there and trimming some plants out or moving some decor around, you can really have a significant impact on, that ecosystem and that water chemistry and everything that's going on in there. It's way more complex than I'm ever going to begin to understand, as I've said before. So anyway, there you go. Sorry for the super duper long-winded video here, but that's what you get with me sometimes. So there you go. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget, this one here is my 20-gallon office tank. Look forward to some changes over time, and I will see you real soon on the next one.